Good evening. My name is Bill Martin. I'm a senior fellow for drug policy here at the Baker Institute, and welcome you to this program this evening. I think it's going to be quite fascinating. I suspect that no one here disagrees with the proposition that drugs can cause enormous harm. They can ruin the lives of those who use them and those whose lives they affect. They're implicated in a wide range of crimes. They endanger innocent citizens of numerous countries. They're involved and fund terrorism, and they threaten or seriously undercut the development and practice of democracy. There is, however, considerable disagreement over the nature and extent of that harm, the factors that contribute to its many facets, and the best way to go about addressing the numerous issues that cluster under the drug problem. For more than a century, U.S. drug policy has been based on the concept of prohibition, on the desire for a drug-free America with zero tolerance for drug users, traffickers, and producers. But the declared war on drugs actually started in 1968 when Richard Nixon, during his presidential campaign, was casting about for ammunition, and one of his advisors, John Ehrlichman, suggested that narcotic suppression was a sexy political issue. Since then, it's been continued by nearly every president, regardless of party or stance on other issues, and below the presidential level, many a candidate has used a promise to throw them in the can and sit on the lid as a tactic as a surefire campaign tactic. It is truly a war with all the hallmarks of war: displaced populations, disrupted economies, excessive violence, terrorism, the use of military force, the curtailment of civil liberties, and the demonizing of enemies. And it consists essentially of two elements: the predominant role of criminalization of all things having to do with marijuana, cocaine, heroin, ecstasy, and other prohibited drugs, and the presumption that abstinence, coerced if necessary, is the only possible permissible relationship with those drugs. And it's that combination that ultimately makes this war unwinnable. My interest, some of you who know of my work at the Institute, is I'm also senior fellow for religion and public policy. And at a recent Baker Institute roundtable where we met with the different associates or people who came and talked with us, my sign said religion and drug policy, which was, it really needed a comma. But I didn't just pull this interest out of the air. For 35 years or 37 years of teaching at Rice in the sociology department, from the very beginning, I taught American social problems, and then shortly after that added criminology and criminal justice. And you cannot escape the discussion of drugs in those courses. And like many other people who have looked closely at American drug policy, I'm critical of the war on drugs, not because I want to use any of these drugs myself, or because my children or grandchildren have ever gotten into any difficulty with them, but because I am offended by public policy that is enormously expensive, largely ineffective, and capable of great harm. I've read a great many books and hundreds of articles about the war on drugs and various issues related to drugs. Without question, the best book I have read or know about on this subject is Judge James Gray's book, Why Our Drug Laws Have Failed and What We Can Do About It, a judicial indictment of the war on drugs. I look forward to reading his new book, Wearing the Robe, the Art and Responsibilities of Judging in Today's Courts. Unfortunately, the bookstore's orders didn't come in, so we don't have that book for you, but we do have Why Our Drug Laws Have Failed, and I hope you'll pick up a copy. You'll be richly rewarded by it. I'm not going to subtract from Judge Gray's time by reciting his professional biography, which is recorded for you in the programs that you have received, except to note that he has served our country in a number of capacities, in peace and in war, in the courts as prosecutor, counsel for the defense, and judge, for which he's been honored on multiple occasions, and in print as a clear and gifted writer. He knows as much about drug policy from a number of different angles as anyone I know. Judge Gray played an important role in a drug policy conference here at the Baker Institute in 2002. And by the way, the papers from that, you can access those papers by going to bakerinstitute.org, clicking on drug policy, and down below you'll see a set of papers from that conference. And if you're interested in this, really interested in this topic, I strongly urge you to look through those papers. I've long looked for a propitious time for him to return, and that time has come. And I'm so happy to have him here. Will you join me in welcoming Judge Jim Gray?
Bill, thank you. It is a pleasure to be with good people talking about this issue or any other. In my view, the issue of drug policy is probably the most important critical issue facing our country today. I know that sounds like an exaggeration, but as we go along, I think you will agree with me that drug policy of the United States of America, namely drug prohibition, has its tentacles in just about everything that's going wrong in our world today. I also deeply want to thank the James Baker Institute for hosting a conference on this subject and for asking me to come and speak before the conference. And, of course, it wouldn't have happened without Bill Martin, who is a courageous crusader for truth in government and for policies that do work. May I also begin my comments with a kind of a warning to you, and that is that if you continue to have days like you have today, which are gorgeous, beautiful, pleasant, soon you're going to be overrun with population like we are in Southern California, and you want to be careful. So your secret is safe with me, but you don't want to do this too often. As I continue, let me ask you the same question I ask wherever I go. And that is, how many of you here feel that we in the United States of America are in better shape today than we were 5 years ago with regard to the critical issue of drug use and abuse and all of the crime and misery that goes with it? Okay, I see one hand which is about normal. At most, that is what I will see, and if that is based upon education, I think you're right. I think we're making progress with regard to educating our people. But otherwise, I really don't think it's even in dispute that we're not making progress, that we're not in better shape today than we were 5 years ago as to this critical area. Well, what's the first realization that we come to after we understand this proposition? And that is, straightforwardly, that we have no legitimate expectation of being in better shape next year than we're in today, unless we change our approach. Doesn't that make sense? Well, if that's the case, then what should we do as a seemingly intelligent, caring society? And the answer to that is, let's look at what we have done over the past 5, 10, 50, 100 years that has been successful and not successful, and hopefully gravitate over toward what works. But let's take that a step farther, and why should we be so myopic about it? Let's look and see what other countries have done in this area that have been successful and unsuccessful and learn from their experience. Because if you look at it from our standpoint, the United States of America, probably among all of the Western industrialized countries, has the most radical, harsh drug policy of any other country. And we also have a worse drug problem than any other country. There may be a connection there. The United States of America leads the world in the incarceration of our own people, both in sheer numbers as well as per capita. And here I assure you, we're number one does not make me proud. Does it make you proud? Maybe there are better ways of doing this. So if you're going to start discussing drug policy, you have to understand that there are some distinctions that we have to begin to make. And these are distinctions, from my perspective, that the government of the United States has not yet made. What are the distinctions we need to make? Well, first of all, if you're talking about drug policy, the first question you should ask is, what's a drug? What are we talking about here? And as we discussed earlier, and some of the students from Dr. Gordon's class are here, and I went over some of this, but I'll branch off quickly. But we're not talking about aspirin, we're not talking about penicillin, we're talking about mind-altering, sometimes addicting drugs, okay? What are some mind-altering, sometimes addicting drugs? Certainly. Methamphetamine, that's the one that scares me the most. PCP, well, that's pretty bad too. Cocaine, heroin, alcohol? Is alcohol mind-altering? Absolutely. Is it sometimes addicting? Without question. What else? Think of this. The biggest harm to the user of all of these drugs is cigarettes. The biggest harm to the user is cigarettes. We kill somewhere in the order of 400,000 people every year because they themselves smoke cigarettes. Is that a part of our drug policy for the United States of America? No. Should it be? Absolutely. Does that mean that we should make nicotine illegal and put people in jail for using, possessing, selling it? And the answer is, of course not. You don't want to bring Al Capone and all of the thugs and all of the crime and corruption and disrespect for the law with it. But we can learn lessons from this. This should be a part of our drug policy. And of course, the biggest used mind-altering, sometimes addicting drug in our country, in our world, is alcohol is number 2. Caffeine. Okay? Should we make caffeine illegal? I mean, of course not. Should we give people honest education about what caffeine does? And the answer is yes. Do we? No. Should we study what the effects are of caffeine on young, growing people? The answer is yes. We really don't know much about that. So these are distinctions that we have to start making. With regard to our system in general, we should figure out the difference and utilize the difference between drug use and drug misuse and drug abuse and drug addiction. Those are all different stages of the problem. Maybe it's not a problem. Okay, I will confess to you. I've done this before. I'll do it again. Pretty much every day after work, I go home and take a mind-altering, sometimes addicting drug. Namely, I have a glass of wine with dinner. Sometimes I have 2. Am I a problem user? No, I'm really careful. Don't drive after drinking. I've never hit anybody or assaulted anybody after drinking, or before either, for that matter. But I'm really careful. Equate that with any of these other illicit drugs, and I would be an addict. Anybody that's considered to take marijuana or any of these other drugs on that frequency every day, for heaven's sake, would be defined as a drug addicted. Now, there's another distinction we have to make, and that is there is a difference between what you put into your body and your actions under its influence. And to bring that point home, I would suggest to you that it makes as much sense to me to put this gifted actor Robert Downey Jr. in jail for his drug addiction, and he certainly seems to have a cocaine addiction, as it would have Betty Ford in jail for her alcohol addiction. Isn't that the same thing? It's a medical issue, and it should be addressed by medical responses, by medical professionals. And I will go to bat on that as to any of these other mind-altering, sometimes addicting substances. That does not mean, please, that I'm not thinking this is any big deal. It is. I have been talking about this issue now for 16 years publicly, and I have never, ever heard anyone say that being a heroin addict is a good thing. We all know that's not a good thing, but it's a medical issue. We're going to talk about that a little more in depth in a few minutes when we talk about what's going on in Switzerland today. And you will be pleased to hear that there are options that work, that can address these issues. But if Robert Downey Jr., Betty Ford, you or I drive a motor vehicle impaired by, you name it, alcohol, cocaine, marijuana, methamphetamine, whatever, that's a crime, isn't it? Why? If you're going to drive a motor vehicle impaired by any of these drugs, that's a crime because now your actions are putting our safety at risk. And that is a legitimate function for the criminal justice system. Bring them to me. In fact, I am proud to say, really proud to say, I've been on the bench since 1983 By June of 1984, 7 months after I took the bench, I had seen that alcohol-related offenses were clearly, easily the biggest problem areas that we were facing at that trial court level. And we were able to put in the first drug court in the United States of America, to my knowledge, in June of 1984, where we screened out problem-using alcohol offenders. Now, you can call them alcoholics. That kind of smacks as name-calling, so we didn't do that. We called them high-risk problem drinkers, but you know what we meant. And so we would take out those alcoholics and put in a program for them. I'd give them a choice, weighted as the day is long, but I would give them a choice. I would say, ma'am, sir, you are a problem-using alcohol-dependent person. You are addicted to alcohol. So you're not a good risk for probation. Because if you're going to be put on probation, that means you're not likely to be a candidate for recidivism, and you are. I'm not going to do that. So I won't put you on probation, but you can, first-time offense, driving under the influence of alcohol, I will fine you, I will put you in jail for 90 days, and I will suspend your license for 6 months. And that'll take care of that. And that's your sentence. You plead guilty. You're found guilty. That's what you're going to get. Or you can show that you are a good candidate for probation. We're going to put you on this program, and you're going to abstain completely from alcohol throughout the 3 years that you're on probation. If I find out, and I'm not even joking, although it sounds that way, if you even eat rum cake, I will put you in jail in that period of time. And I mean it. I was able, by doing that, to keep these alcoholics, these high-risk problem drinkers, 65% of them off alcohol for as long as I was able to keep statistics, which was about 8 months. We're replacing drinking drivers with sober drivers, and everybody wins. And if you would get involved in other offenses, certainly alcohol-related, I would have the probation violation hearing and would hold you accountable. Now, if somebody would show up to one of their programs after having been drinking, or any other thing that would be called to my attention, I'd take that really seriously. I would call them first on my calendar. Mr. Smith, your case, come up here. It's my understanding you've been drinking. If you agree, I'm going to hold you accountable, revoke your probation, reinstate it. I'll give you this sentence I would have given you before, but now it's even more serious. I'll put you in jail for 120 days instead, suspend your license, etc. Or if you want to go back on the program, that's fine. I will put you in jail for 10 days and put you back on the program. Which do you choose? Okay, I think I'll go back on the program. Okay, see my bailiff. He'd stand there. Everybody in the courtroom is quiet. They're finding religion. This ogre in a black robe actually means what he's saying, which for alcoholics is a revelation sometimes. Click as the handcuffs go on, and Mr. Smith is led off. Now, what has happened? Mr. Smith realizes he's responsible for his actions. The other people who are in my courtroom think, my goodness, this guy means what he says. I'd better stop drinking. I'd better take this program seriously. It works. The reason why I'm going through all of this now is it works for other offenses as well. Alcohol does not have to be illegal in order to hold people accountable for their actions. And that's a major distinction that we simply must begin to make in the criminal justice system. I am sorry to tell you, first of all, these drugs are here to stay. We've tried to make them illegal. We've tried to keep them away from our children and the rest of us, and it hasn't worked. These drugs are fully available today in any quantity you want, governed only by price. In fact, I will go so far as to say, without contradiction, that you can get, if you are in prison, you can get all the drugs you want in prison, governed again. It's more expensive because it's difficult to bring in, but they're there. I will go farther to that in saying, you know Charles Manson. Charles Manson was transferred from Corcoran State Prison in the state of California to a different penal institution because he was found to be selling drugs from his prison cell, and he was in solitary confinement. If we can't keep drugs out of prison, for heaven's sake, how do we expect to keep them off the streets of Houston or Dallas or any other town and city in our country? So I regret to tell you, for all of our efforts, the drugs are here to stay. I will go farther and ask you, you're under 21, are you not? Yes. I ask people this all the time, young people. If you wanted to, would you know where to go to get marijuana? And they'll raise their, if they want to, it's available. It is more available to get marijuana, for example, than it is alcohol. Why? Why is that true? Because it is. Because the purveyors of illegal drugs don't ask for ID. What is going on here? We have people who are going to say, oh no, wait a minute. Nobody is going to want my 14-year-old daughter to get hooked on cocaine. And the answer is, yes, they do. Why? Because of the money. Because of the money. They make money if your children get hooked on these drugs. But they don't get to do that with regard to alcohol so much. I know that alcohol is available. I'm not naive. But at least it's regulated and controlled, which brings me to another secret. It shouldn't be a secret, but it is. And that is, prohibition never works as well as regulation and control. Prohibition never works as well as regulation and control. What does that mean? As soon as we prohibit a substance, we give up all of our abilities to be able to control it, to regulate it. When we finally repealed alcohol prohibition, what happened? Well, first of all, homicides went down 40% in a year. Let me say that again. Homicides went down the first year after we repealed alcohol prohibition by 40% and continued to go down each year thereafter until the beginning of the Second World War. We no longer had those bathtub gin problems. That, you know, these were serious problems back then. People would concoct this alcohol and they'd cook it wrong, they'd do whatever, and it would attack your nervous system. It'd kill people or attack their nervous system, and all kinds of bad things would happen. We can control those issues. So these are things that we simply need to address, to realize that they're out there and start talking about them. So another distinction. What have we started talking about? What is a drug? Hold people accountable for their actions instead of what they put into their bodies. And by the way, I'm a libertarian. I acknowledge it openly. I'm proud of it. It makes as much sense to me to allow the government to control what we put into our bodies as it does what we put into our minds. As adults, children are different. Once you're 21, the government has no business telling us what we should put into our bodies. Control their actions like we discussed. Does that mean drugs are no big deal? Please, of course not. Of course they are. But there are better ways of addressing it. Education works. Drug treatment works. If only to talk about the addiction that is fully as addictive as cocaine, namely, again, nicotine, tobacco. We're making real progress in California and elsewhere around the country in taking people away from using cigarettes, aren't we? Why? Because of education, because of social mores. We can't smoke, I venture to say, in this room because we have regulation and control about it. We have age restrictions. We have advertising restrictions. None of that applies once you make something illegal. But it works. How many people here feel that cigarettes are dangerous to the user? No question about it. I lost my mother to breast cancer. She smoked all of my life, and I hated it. It's the only good thing that came out of her addiction, but I hated it. But we can make progress taking people away from smoking cigarettes. You agree that it's dangerous. How many of you therefore believe that we should make tobacco illegal? I'm seeing two hands. So you want to bring Al Capone back into the cigarette distribution business, is basically what you're saying. Because these are problems, but we're making progress because of treatment, because of education, because of social mores. We can do the same with regard to these other drugs as well. So, what we need to do is to ask ourselves one additional distinction, and that is we are fighting two wars here. We are addressing two significant problems. Number one is drug harm, and there's no question but what these sometimes addicting, sometimes dangerous drugs cause harm. I don't mean to say anything to the contrary, just like my alcohol does. But there's also drug money harm that we are facing. And these are two almost entirely different animals, two entirely different things. And it's our drug money that has corrupted and is corrupting the entire country of Colombia. You think about it. Colombia does not particularly have a drug problem. They really don't. But they have an overwhelming, mind-boggling drug money problem. And it's our money, of course, that's doing it. Our drug money is corrupted. Their police, their military, some of their judges, their safety, their way of life. And we arrogantly go down there and tell these people, oh, you should work harder to solve our problem. We go down to that country and tell them, seemingly with a straight face, not growing your largest cash crop is good for you. And then we're surprised when it doesn't work. We are going down there and saying we should repeal the law of supply and demand, and get expressed surprise when it doesn't work. And you know something? Through all of that, the irony is we could bulldoze Colombia. We could obliterate it from the face of the earth. In fact, you could take Ecuador and Peru with it if you wanted to, bulldoze it completely, get rid of it completely off the face of the earth, and it wouldn't make the slightest bit of difference with regard to our drug problems here in the United States of America. Why? We've already talked about that. Because if the demand is here, the demand will be met. And if it's not going to be met by Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, it will be met by Nigeria, or Afghanistan, or Thailand, or Burma, or California. Are you aware what the largest cash crop is today in the state of California? Marijuana. Number 2 is grapes. It's unbelievable. It is basically as illegal as it can be, and it's the number 1 crop in the state of California. And it's true in numbers of other states as well. So let's recognize that reality. Drug money harm is something that we can do something about. Taking away the price, taking away the cost, taking away the financial incentives is really, really important, and we can do it. Does that mean we abandon all of this stuff? Of course not. We tell our children, who are actually human, they will understand this. We have fought this drug war by trying to keep these drugs away from you, my son, my daughter, and it didn't work. So now we're going to change our approach and do what does work, which is education, honest education, truthful, full education with our children, at mind levels, at age levels, of course. Treatment does work. Holding you accountable for your actions does work. But otherwise, we're going to get away from that corruption and the rest. So we need to become, the final distinction is, we need to become managers of this problem and not moralizers. Today, we will put you in jail, in prison, if you fail our chemical chastity case, if you fail our conception of morality. And it doesn't work. So we do have options to this failed policy, I am proud to tell you. And if you do get a copy of my book, and I'm proud to have this available, I worked hard on it because there's so much to discuss. The first half of my book will talk about so many of the harms that we have inflicted upon ourselves because of our chosen policy of drug prohibition. And I'll tell you that we have lost more of our civil liberties because of the drug prohibition than anything in the history of our country. Are we in better shape because we've lost a lot of our Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, First Amendment protections? And the answer is no. We've already agreed we're not in better shape today than we were, but we have lost our civil liberties. We are increasing crime. Come to Los Angeles, come to Orange County where I am from, and you will see, sit in the courts, which I have presided over and others. 80% of all felony crime in Los Angeles and Orange counties are drug-related offenses. 80%. 80%. Half of that 80% is straight drug crime. Possession with intent to sell, possession, what one seller does and violence against the other seller to protect his fiefdom and his customers and the rest, that's half. The other half is crimes that drug-addicted people commit in order to get the money to buy the expensive drugs. 80%. And we churn low-level drug offenders through the system. Great expense to the taxpayer, and it's almost worthless because they don't get drug treatment when they're in prison. They come out, they're still drug addicted, they go back to their same society, and I see them again. Oh, you are back again, Elmer, how you doing? You know, we put them in prison. It's the most expensive option. June of 1994, the Rand Corporation, pretty good outfit, well-respected outfit, came out with a study saying that we get 7 times more value for our tax dollar by drug treatment than we do in incarceration, even for heavy-using, drug-addicted people. 7 times. Where are the headlines? Hey, folks, you care about how your tax money is spent? I do. 7 times more value for our tax dollars by drug treatment than incarceration. By the way, they didn't say, this person is going to burglarize your house or drive under the influence, give them a break. That's not what they say. It's just with regard to their actions, about their drug addictions. Let me share with you. Donovan State Prison in San Diego County, California, has a really good but small drug treatment program in prison. It's a men's prison. And they don't segregate the men who are taking this treatment program. They are there, they're often violent, there for felonies, drug addicted, pretty hard-line types. But they have a drug treatment program. What does that mean? Doesn't mean that they show them some slides and show them a few videos and say, you know, don't do that anymore. But they do get medical information. They do get anger management training. They do get assistance with regard to job skills. And all importantly, they also receive a aftercare program of a support group once they're released on parole. These men who were there for those offenses have a recidivism rate of 18% within the first year. 18% are convicted of some form of probation violation or parole violation, or other offense and are back in state prison within a year. 18%. The same people that were there for the same offenses who do not get that drug treatment, do not get that aftercare, you know what their recidivism rate is? 80%. You tell me what works. Think of the victims that are not victimized. Think of the prosecutors, the police that don't have to investigate and prosecute, and juries don't have to prosecute those offenses. It works. Accountability is important. Accountability works, but you also have to understand that the tougher we get with regard to drug crime, the softer we get with regard to the prosecution of everything else, because we only have so many resources. As a federal prosecutor, by the way, I held the record for the largest drug prosecution in the Central District of California back in 1978. 75 kilos of heroin, 160 pounds, that was and is a whole lot of heroin. 1978. Does anybody have a concept of what the record drug prosecution is today in the Central District of California? 18 tons of cocaine in one place. Can you imagine how much that is? When I was a federal prosecutor, the standard wholesale quality, strength of wholesale narcotics was about 20%. Today, the average wholesale quality quantity is 80%. When I was a federal prosecutor, the cost of a wholesale kilo of cocaine or heroin was about $25,000. Today it's about half that, $12,000 to $13,000. You tell me if we've made progress. Look, it's out there, folks. Somebody is buying it. The cost is lower, the quantity is through the roof. Now, I'm not going to be able, I will be here tomorrow until my plane leaves tomorrow late afternoon at this conference. I hope you are. I'm probably not going to be able to ask questions. It's just the way life is going to be. But you can. Ask the people tomorrow. We have all of these seizures of narcotics, other drugs. Does it matter? We have all of these arrests of low-level drug offenders or high-level drug offenders. Manuel Noriega is in prison. Does it matter? Has it made any difference? We have arrested, you pick a corner, First and Main, I don't care, someplace downtown Houston. You arrest some big-time drug dealer. Does it make any difference? Or is it just an employment opportunity for somebody to take his place? When I was here before, no, that's not true. I read in the paper, Asa Hutchinson, when he was head of the DEA, made the comment, I'm pretty sure it was he, made the comment, at any one time, the drug lords in Mexico warehoused 200 tons of cocaine in Mexico within 3 miles of our border, just waiting for a scarcity somewhere in the United States so they could ship it over. Ask them, does the seizure of a ton of cocaine mean that we're not going to have any cocaine here anymore? Does it matter? Ask these questions because it does matter. We need to address these things. So, we have options. I am suggesting to you, I am stating to you, that anything we would do to replace our failed and hopeless policy of drug prohibition would be better than what we're doing now. Anything. This isn't in jest. I virtually am saying that we could make cocaine legal, which I do not favor. We could give the stuff away on a street corner. We could bless it by every religious leader in the city of Houston, and I am not going to jam cocaine up my nose. I'm not going to do it. And probably you aren't either. I say probably because if you are, you're probably doing it already. It's here. It's available. Now, of course, the lower classes, economically, they can't hide their drug addiction. But drug addiction, drug misuse, drug abuse is pretty much widespread over every socioeconomic, racial group in our country today. And if any group uses it more than any other, it's basically mine. It is upper middle class, white, Caucasian males. If any group uses drugs more than any other, it's that one. But you can walk through any jail or prison in the United States of America, and it does not take a sociologist to figure out that the people that are overrepresented are people of color. That is not the country I want to stand for. But there are better ways. So what are some of them? I'm starting to get excited here, so I know my time is running. Needle exchange. Needle exchange, what is that? It's a medicalization program that's pretty much the most fundamental, straightforward, easy to understand. You exchange a dirty needle for a clean one. No money changes hands, no questions are asked, end of discussion. Okay? All studies show, Centers for Disease Control, Yale University, University of California, all of the studies show that needle exchange programs do not increase drug usage. They don't decrease it either. They're pretty much neutral, but they do decrease the incidence of HIV, AIDS, hepatitis by about 50%. 50%. Holland. Holland has sophisticated people there that realize these drugs are harmful, so they set up a system overall to reduce the harm that can and will be caused in those communities by those drugs, understanding the drugs are here to stay. And they looked around them and they saw, 8% of the people that use injecting illegal drugs in our country have the AIDS virus. That's too much. We can do better than that. So they put in programs across the country of needle exchange, just like we discussed. And you know what happened? In several years, it was reduced to 4%. You want to know a crime? Do you know what the percentage is in the United States of America of the people that use illicit injecting drugs have the HIV, AIDS virus? It's about 35%. 35%. I don't care what you think of a drug-addicted or drug-using, injecting drug person. You can call them moral degenerates. You can call them indolent. You can call them lazy. You can certainly call them criminals. They do not deserve to die of AIDS. Now, I'm from Orange County, pretty conservative area, and I regret to say that that is not a persuasive argument with many of my fellow Southern Californians. So I can get their attention a different way. Do you know it costs the taxpayers about $100,000 for every person in our country that gets AIDS? So if it isn't a human issue, let's talk finances. I'm prepared. This is wrong. This is something that we simply cannot tolerate. And Bill, I read your article today that you had given me, published through the James Baker Institute on needle exchange. I wish I'd had it when I was writing my book. I would have cited it, but you were too late. But these are things that we really must do. Now let me talk to you about Switzerland. Switzerland has a problem that most countries of the world regretfully do not have. Namely, they have no down-and-out areas. They don't have any slums, because economically they're really doing pretty well. But they do have heroin addicts. And if you don't have any down-and-out areas, it's a lot harder to hide the heroin addicts than it is in places in our country where we do, because we sweep them off into these other areas. And so they decided that they would try to work out a program to reduce those difficulties, reduce those harms. And what they did around the mid-1990s, was that they put in a pilot program in 7 cities in their country. The pilot program would put in a medical clinic in these 7 cities, and it would be staffed by 3 people: a medical doctor, a registered nurse, and a social worker. And what would these people do? They would go out into the drug-using communities, and they would find heroin-addicted people, and they'd bring them into the clinic. And then what would they do? Same thing you or I would do. They'd try to give them drug treatment. They'd try to help them get off these drugs. But it's a fact of life that a lot of these people either don't feel they can get off their drugs or don't want to at that particular time. And so they would tell them, okay, if you can satisfy 3 criteria, we have a program for you. The first criterion is you're at least 22 years of age and have failed typical traditional drug treatment at least twice. The second thing is that you are a heroin addict. Not too hard to prove. And the third thing is basically that in the future you will be crime-free. You will not be involved in criminal violations. If these people could convince the staff that they qualify for those 3 things, they'd be placed on the program. What does that mean? It means that they would be given a prescription for heroin that could be filled at pharmaceutical prices, not injected in the clinics, not illegally, under medical care supervision. Now, I'll stop. Let me stop for a minute and talk to you about a couple of things. The first is that none of these drugs we can discuss are expensive. None of them. They don't call marijuana a weed for nothing. It'll grow anywhere. The opium poppy, beautiful flower, by the way, gorgeous flower, it'll grow pretty much anywhere. Now, the DEA would have you believe that it can only grow in the mountainous regions of Colombia or whatever. Not true. The opium poppy was grown by the National Park Service for years at Monticello until the DEA found out about it and made them take it out. I assure you, if the opium poppy will grow in Monticello, it'll grow in pretty much anywhere as well. So the only reason that any of these drugs are expensive is because they're illegal. As a consequence, back to the clinics in Switzerland, even the heaviest using heroin user could support his or her habit for a maximum of $10 a day. If they couldn't afford that, yes, it would be subsidized. Most people could afford that. The other thing is, this is not an orgy of heroin usage. They would be screened by a medical doctor, a blood test. They would find out what their dosage levels were, and they would get heroin accordingly that would keep them at that level. So they wouldn't get that euphoria or surge or whatever you get from it. It wouldn't be enough to do that, but it was enough to keep them from going through withdrawal. It would maintain them at their current level. Hence, the program is called a heroin maintenance program. Okay? Now, let's go back to the story. The Minister of Health of Switzerland held a press conference less than a year after they began in these 7 cities. Remember, it's a 3-year pilot program. And he said, we're not going to wait the full 3 years. We're going to expand this program to all 20 cities in Switzerland right away. Why? Because of the results that we are seeing. The first thing they found is that crime, I'm old enough to remember Groucho Marx, and You Bet Your Life. And if you'd say the right word, the duck would fly down. I think I just said the right word and got a bell going off. But the first thing they found out is that crime in the neighborhoods surrounding the clinics plummeted. Now, wait a minute. What's going on here? What's the difference? Let's say we have 30 people, 30 heroin-addicted people that are on this program, receiving pharmaceutical-grade heroin, etc. What does that have to do with crime? What do drug-addicted people do to get the money to buy their heroin? Burglaries? Hit you over the head at the ATM when you're taking money out? Check offenses? Prostitution? The merchants in the neighborhoods surrounding the clinics experienced a 7-fold decrease in shoplifting. They were very pleased. Well, why is this? Because if you're even arrested, you're off the program. You have to go back to your hustle. You've got to go back to finding your source. You've got to get the money to buy these drugs. And they all realized if that happens to me, it's a lot of effort to be a burglar and to do all of this stuff every day, to get your source and everything else. So they'd be behind the 8 ball if that were to happen. They stay away from crime, and crime has plummeted. Second thing they found, drug usage in the neighborhoods surrounding the clinics also plummeted. Oh, wait a minute. We've got 30 people, in fairness, that are probably using more heroin now than they were before. Why? Less expensive, steady source of supply, not illegal. If anything, that increases drug usage. How could they get off by finding that it decreased drug usage? Ask yourself again, what do drug-addicted people do to support their habits? Sure, burglaries and prostitutions, but almost invariably, they get larger amounts of drugs and then they sell them to you, your neighbors, your children to support their habits, right? But if you're even arrested, you're off the program. That means fewer people are selling drugs in the communities, fewer people are buying and using drugs in the communities. Drug usage has gone down. By the way, we mentioned that the United States of America leads the world in the incarceration of our people. So many of those are these people that are selling drugs to support their habits. Yes, you'll hear from the DEA and all these other, oh no, we don't put drug users in prison. That's not true, and I'll explain that in a minute. But they do put into prison the drug sellers. Well, those are the ones that are there, represented disproportionately. They're drug addicted, yes, they were selling, and now they're in prison. Third thing they found, the employment by these people went up by 50%. They were starting to support themselves, support their families, pay their taxes, off the dole. Those were good things. Now let's stop and think for a minute. I don't care what you think about heroin. I don't care what you think about drug-addicted people or anything else. Crime going down is a good thing. Drug usage going down is a good thing. Employment going up is a good thing. And that's what the people of Switzerland thought as well. Fourth thing they saw was that the medical problems that these people were having were starting to get better. First of all, they were injecting under medically controlled, hygienic circumstances, so it was injecting less dangerously. I'm not going to say safely, because it's not safe, but it's less dangerously. Nobody has gotten the AIDS virus. Nobody has gotten hepatitis. Nobody has overdosed. And they have a relationship with this medical team. So their other medical issues are beginning to be addressed, and they're getting healthier. And fifth, surprisingly enough. They would build up a relationship with this medical team and say, you know, in fairly quick order, Doc, take me to the next step. I trust you now. Help me with drug treatment. Help me get off this stuff. And larger numbers were starting to take that drug treatment and get off these drugs. But as a result, this program is now permanent in Switzerland. Well, permanent at least until the year 2014 in all 20 cities. But there are always some folks out there, and I understand this. I call them the moralizers. You can't do this. The government is now the pusher. The government is furnishing this stuff to people. That's just not right. We can't stand for that. And if that fails, because people can pretty much get over that by realizing what's happening. But if that fails, they'll hit you with their knockout blow. And that is, but you're sending the wrong message to our children. I'm going to ask you, what's the right message? Because today the message we're sending to people is, if you use drugs, go ahead and die. Now we have an answer for this. We can help you with your overdosing problem, with AIDS, with hepatitis. But we're not going to do that because you fail our morality test. And that's the message that we're giving out to our children and everyone else. But as a result, the people of Switzerland put this on the ballot. They had a plebiscite nationwide, late 1990s, resolved, we will do away with the heroin maintenance programs in our country. And you know what happened? It failed by more than 70% of the vote. This does not mean that the people in Switzerland are less tolerant of drug use, abuse, addiction than we are. Doesn't mean that at all. But they see a program that's working. And when it comes down to it, nobody can tell me or you that Swiss parents love their children any less than we do. But they see this program that's working. And I say, take it a step beyond that. Don't hide needle exchange programs from our children. Don't hide heroin maintenance programs from our children. Take them there. Let them talk with these drug-addicted people. What do you think they're going to tell them? Oh, follow my lead? Look at me. You want to live this way? It's a good life. You think they're going to tell them that? Nonsense. They're going to tell them the truth. My son, my daughter, it's the worst mistake I ever made. You know how I got involved in all this stuff? Well, somebody gave me a free sample. I thought it was cool. Whatever their individual story would be. That's honest education that our kids will learn from that. So let me ask you this question. Be creative. Can any of you come up with any reason at all why we should not have a similar program of needle exchange and heroin maintenance programs in every town and city in our country? Anybody? Because I can't. Why don't we do that? We need your help to put these medical issues in the hands of medical professionals instead of police officers. Does that mean we condone drug abuse? Of course not. It means I hate these drugs so much. I want to change our program, our policy, and start addressing them. Holding people accountable for their actions, not what they put into their bodies. It works. Then, by the way, there's one thing I regress. When I was a kid, long ago, you'd have all these Coke cans and bottles out around all over the place. And when they started passing these recycling laws, they disappeared. And you don't see many Coke cans or other bottles out there now. Why? Because there's money in them. So if some people throw them away, and some do, others will follow along and they'll pick them up. Talk about a needle exchange program. If you give value to a dirty needle, hypodermic needle and syringe, you're not going to find them around either. Thankfully, because that is a major medical risk for police officers, for children in sandlots, or some custodians who are going to pick up the trash or something. You get pricked by a dirty needle and you're in trouble. And we're doing a lot better if we can put a value on these old dirty needles, contaminated, to be able to exchange them. It's going to be the same matter to address again. That was a digression, I'm sorry. So what should we do? Where do we go first? Needle exchange programs, yes. And you in Houston, you don't have them as far as I understand, and you should. And it's up to you to get that message out. It's up to you to give political cover to your mayors and your city council and your chiefs of police and all of these other people. Demand it. And the people who are in elected office are really good at followership. They will follow where the votes are. And if you give them that political cover, you're going to get these programs to everyone's benefit. But what else should we do? And my suggestion is we should treat marijuana like alcohol. My suggestion is we should treat marijuana like alcohol. I've already told you that I use alcohol. I'm not going to smoke marijuana unless I feel I need chemotherapy and I need it for nausea or a medical doctor recommends it. I don't smoke anything. I'm just not interested, and we've gone through that already, and I expect that the rest of you are similarly inclined. But no one has ever died from an overdose of marijuana. If you're concerned about violence, and we purport to be, our government at least says so, what drug that we use prevalently is most closely associated with violence? And the answer to that is alcohol. So we really should make alcohol again illegal and legalize marijuana if that's your concern. I do not propose that, but if that's your concern, that's what we should do. Marijuana is fully available. We've already talked about that. It's the largest cash crop in the state of California, all the rest of that. So why don't we recognize that reality, hold people accountable for their conduct, and treat marijuana like alcohol? What would happen if we were to do that? 5 things, all of them beneficial, all of them virtually immediate. First thing is, and again, now I can only talk about California. In California, we would save $1 billion that we now spend, taxpayer money, in a futile effort to eradicate marijuana and prosecute and incarcerate nonviolent marijuana offenders. That is money we now spend we could save. Number 2, we could tax the stupid stuff, generate revenue of at least $1.5 billion every year, state of California alone. So now we have turned our budget deficit by $2.5 billion. You'd think people would care. Number 3 trumps the first 2, in my opinion. We've already discussed it. We would make marijuana less available for children than it is today. And we've already gone through that, and I stand on that proposition. Number 4, this entire medical marijuana issue would go away. We would return this issue to medical community or to others, and that which we literally have the federal government acting as bullies. And we have some stories about that, and I could tell you if you ask and everything too. But why they are treating this as such a criminal justice issue when we have people literally who are dying in hospice centers who have been recommended to use marijuana by medical doctors and are being arrested for that. And that is simply something that we would get rid of. And 5th, the entire hemp industry, which we don't have time to talk about here either, goes back thousands of years, is a viable industrial product, could be revitalized. And just suffice to say, you get 4 times the amount of paper pulp from an acre of hemp as you do from an acre of trees. And it takes a season to grow the hemp and takes 20 years to grow the trees. So these are all things that we could, in effect, revitalize. So what are we doing? Where do we go from here? What we're doing isn't working. We're putting people in prison all around the world. You look at Afghanistan, and the fighting going on in Afghanistan, yes, the Taliban and politically and philosophically and the rest, but much of the fighting is between one drug lord saving his fiefdom from another drug lord. Afghanistan now leads the world in the opium poppy, providing heroin all around the world. We can deal with that. You can go back to Erich Honecker if you want to. East Germany was involved deeply with selling of illicit drugs. You know, the North Korean, as I understand it, and I'm not privy to any extra information, the North Korean nuclear program was basically financed by the North Korean government selling illicit drugs. So, in our present policy, In any program you're going to talk about, you always have some winners and some losers, right? You mention a policy, and I will tell you, you have some people coming out ahead and some people coming out behind. That's true in anything. Education, healthcare, anything, including drug policy. Today, who is winning with regard to the war on drugs? And the answer is, I have 6 groups. See if you agree with me. The first group is the big-time drug dealers. They're making millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars every year, tax-free, and they're coming out ahead. And by the way, no one in law enforcement will tell you with a straight face that we seize more than 10% of the illegal drugs in our society today. And the more candid ones will tell you the truth, which is it's about 5%. So understand and recognize every time we seize a ton of cocaine, and you really can't imagine how much a ton of cocaine is, it's not a victory. It's just a symbol of the depth of the problem. Because for every ton of heroin we seize, or cocaine, we easily fail to seize somewhere between 10 and 15 tons. And now you're beginning to understand the problem. The big guys, the drug dealers, are winning. Number 2 group of people that are winning are the juvenile gangs and other gangs of people that actually have their existence so that they can be a part of the action and they can sell drugs. The third group of people that are winning are in law enforcement, the people who are in public life who are receiving large-time tax money to fight against the first group. Their monies are increasing, their powers are increasing, their bureaucracy is increasing, they're winning. All stop. I need to make a caveat here. I am not pointing a finger at law enforcement here and saying you failed us. That flat out is not true. This is a dangerous job. These people are doing a far better job than we as taxpayers have a right to expect. They're arresting more people, seizing more drugs, getting longer prison sentences and everything connected to it. Blaming law enforcement for the failure of drug prohibition is like blaming Eliot Ness for the failing of alcohol prohibition. It wasn't the police, it's the system. And I want to make that really clear because they're doing a great job. But they're winning too. Fourth group of people that are winning are the politicians. The people that talk tough with regard to the war on drugs. Not smart, just tough. And in fact, we all know that we're dealing in sound bites in today's world. I regret that it's true. They don't come to the Baker Institute and really discuss these matters at length, or at least modestly at length. We give them, what, 15 seconds? You can't. I've been talking for 45 minutes. You just can't put these things into a sound bite. What am I going to say? Support me, I'm running for office, and we'll put all these drug dealers in prison? Or, excuse me, in treatment? I mean, it just doesn't equate. But if I am running for office and I want to sound tough, I can give you lots of reasons to vote for me, show you how tough I am. You give me a 5-second sound bite, and I'll show you how tough I am. Ready? Go. Vote for Gray. I will put those drug dealers in prison and save our children. Pretty good, huh? We hear that all the time. We're hearing it now. It doesn't work, but it shows how tough I am. So politicians are winning. Fifth group of people that are winning are the people in the private sector that make money because of increased crime. Who's that? People that build prisons, people that staff prisons. Prison Guards Union in California is the strongest lobby group in our state today, and it's probably true all around the country. People that have security services, burglar alarm equipment, bonds, I mean, all these criminal defense attorneys, they're winning. They're very happy. And the sixth group of people that are winning are the terrorists of the world. Make no mistake. I'm not going to gild this lily. I'm not going to soft pedal this. This is a fact from my perspective. Terrorism around the world gets its primary source of funding from the sale of illegal drugs. Drug prohibition is the golden goose of terrorism. And if our government really cared about fighting terrorists, they would adopt the policy of a repeal of drug prohibition and taking away the funding for these terrorists. There will always be radical, extremist people out there that are going to do bad things to good people. I know that, but they're going to be a lot less dangerous if they're not funded. And our government has not even questioned taking that step. Oh yes, they have their advertisements pointing at little Molly here, who's 14 years old, who's buying some marijuana, and you say you're supporting terrorists. But that's silly, because the reason why this policy is supporting terrorists is because of our laws of drug prohibition. So those six groups of people are winning. Who's losing? Everybody else? Certainly our taxpayer, and certainly our children. Now, I acknowledge to you, we've already agreed. Almost everyone here agrees that what we're doing isn't working. And most people realize that. We have made dramatic strides in the 16 years now that I've been speaking publicly on this issue of getting information out, getting people to start thinking about this, mulling it over. They're starting to understand and appreciate that just because we discuss drug policy does not mean we condone drug abuse. Just because we discuss the fact that we have options does not mean we condone drug abuse. It's the opposite. In fact, just because we might adopt different options does not mean we condone drug abuse. So people are beginning to think about this, and hooray for that. But the reason why we continue with this failed policy, almost still without question, for all of its defects, is because we want to keep these drugs away from our children. And I understand that. And we're prepared to pay that price if that price need be paid. The difficulty is that it isn't working that way. We are putting our children in harm's way because of our policy of drug prohibition for each of two reasons. Number one, as we've already discussed, and I won't go back through it again, we're making these drugs more available for our children because of drug prohibition than they would ever be if they were regulated and controlled. And the second, and I've seen this in juvenile court year after year, we have the following scenario. You ask yourself, if you are an adult drug dealer, how much risk-taking can you buy from a 15-year-old boy or girl in the inner city or anywhere else for $50 in cash? And the answer is quite a bit. $50 is nothing. It's chump change for an adult drug seller, but for a 15-year-old, 16-year-old child, it's lots of money. As a result, the drug dealers get all of the children they want for a modest amount of money. What do they do with them? Well, they use them as gophers, use them as lookouts, use them as couriers, whatever. And then, once the reliability of these young people is established, they will trust them to go out and sell small amounts of drugs in the communities. Why? Why would they do such a thing? And the answer to that, like the answer to most problems, is money. More money for the kid, more money for the drug dealer, right? Okay. Ask yourself this question. Put tears in your eyes. If you have a 15-year-old selling drugs in the community, who are they going to sell to? Us? No. They're going to go out and sell to their 14, 15, 16-year-old peers, thus recruiting more children to a lifestyle of drug usage and drug selling. And I see this all the time in juvenile court. It isn't the drugs, it's the money that's doing this. And it is not a pretty sight. Let me tell you another story. I was on the Abused and Neglected Children calendar in juvenile court for several years. And about every 3 to 4 weeks, I would have the following scenario come into my own courtroom. Let's say that there was a mother, call her a single parent of 2 children, and she'd make a big mistake. Namely, she'd hook up with the wrong boyfriend. And the boyfriend would be selling drugs. She'd basically know it, but that's kind of the way the cards were dealt. That's just the way it was. So one fine day, he'd come over home and say, look, Helen, tell you what, if you take this package across town and give it to Charlie, I'll pay you $500. And so she'd basically know it contained narcotics, but you know, $500 will pay half my month's rent. I really need the money, so she'd do it. Okay? So she gets arrested. She gets charged with the transporting of 3 ounces of cocaine. She'd be convicted. She'd be sentenced to serve 5 years in prison. Okay, and to be honest with you, under today's system, 5 years in prison for transporting 3 ounces of cocaine is not an unreasonable sentence. Let me ask you this question. When the mother is arrested and incarcerated, what happens to her children? And the answer to that is easy. She has legally abandoned her children, so they come to me on the abused and neglected children calendar. So now I would have this woman. She's in a jail jumpsuit. She's in handcuffs. And I'd look at her and I'd tell her the truth, which is, you know, ma'am, you're not going to be a functional part of your children's lives for the next 5 years. She'd start to well up with tears. Wouldn't you? Ah. But then I look at her and tell her the brutal truth, which is, you understand, of course, that unless you're really lucky and either have a close personal friend or family member that's both willing and able to take custody of your children, they're probably going to be adopted by somebody else by the time you get out of prison. And she starts to weep. Wouldn't you? Ah, but I'm from Orange County, conservative place, and the human issue doesn't always get people's attention. So I'll get your attention as a taxpayer and make you weep again. Because you know how much taxpayer money we're going to be spending for the first year? It costs in Orange County, and probably here, upwards of $5,000 a month to keep a child in a group home. So that means $60,000 a year times 2 children's $120,000 plus another $25,000 to keep the mother in custody. We're going to be spending about $145,000 of taxpayer money simply to separate a mother from her children. And who gets to enforce this? I do. I don't have to do it quietly. It's a release for me just to be able to discuss it with you so that you know what we're doing. And it's senseless. It's stupid. It's counterproductive, except unless you happen to be prison guards union. Then they're really good. So these are things that we just need to talk about. I hate these drugs so much, and what they do, and the harms that they cause, that I want to decrease that harm. I want to decrease these damages. You know, once again, there's never been a society in the history of mankind that hasn't had some form of mind-altering, sometimes addicting drug to use, to misuse, to abuse, or to get addicted to, except maybe the Eskimos. They couldn't grow anything. But now modern chemistry has changed that as well. So let's recognize it. Let's get away from the morality sort of thing and recognize that some people, one way or the other, are going to use these things. Why? Because there must be some benefits. There have to be some benefits. If there weren't, people wouldn't use them. So let's actually conduct honest education and talk with our kids openly. Tell them there are risks involved. But you know what we're doing now? We are lying to our kids, mostly about marijuana. You know, we tell them that if you use marijuana, you know, you're going to drop out, or you're going to get too caught up, or you're going to not, you know, all of this different stuff. And then they look around from their own experience. They either smoke marijuana themselves and they don't feel any different and they're still functioning well, still getting good grades, or they look at some of their peers. And they're on the captain of the debating team, or they're the cheerleader or whatever, and they realize that what we're telling them is simply not true. And then they stop believing us when we do tell them the truth, for example, about methamphetamines, cocaine, or otherwise. So we have to be honest with our kids. Treat them as if they're human. That does not mean that you're going to want to go out and use these drugs. But children, particularly, are in an experimental phase. That's just what kids do. So I hope you join with me in raising your children, at least in this way, the same way I raised mine. I told them, my sons, I have 2 sons and a daughter, if you ever find yourself where you've been out at night and you're driving with somebody that may be under the influence of alcohol or any other drug, get out of the car, call me anytime, day or night, and I will pick you up. No questions will be asked, no repercussions. Because you know something? The most important thing here is your safety. And if you have questions about these drugs, be careful. Don't take them, and we can go through the reasons why. And you're going to ask me a lot of questions I probably won't know the answer to, but we'll find the answer together. And I really hope that you get high on life. You be careful what you put into your body, because you know, whether these drugs are legal or illegal, your body doesn't forget. I happen to believe that some of the most harmful things that we can put into our body are French fried potatoes, potato chips and donuts. I have high cholesterol, and that's of concern to me. How many of you agree with me that donuts should be illegal? You know, there's only so much we can do. Well, I'm sorry, French fried potatoes. But these are things that our kids, you know, they look around. They recognize. We say, don't do drugs. Well, wait a minute. You know, they come home after work and they have a couple of stiff drinks. Our kids know what it is. They recognize hypocrisy. You know, when little Julie here gets all hysterical because it's prom night and the man of her, boy of her dreams asks somebody else to the prom, they give her a Valium. Kids know this. Kids recognize hypocrisy. So let's tell them the truth and tell them they'll be accountable for their actions. Tell them that their body will make them accountable for whatever they put into their bodies. And also be careful because you don't know what the strength is. You don't know what the purity is. And then let's focus on drug treatment as well. I myself remember several times when I was sentencing a burglar. And I was going to send him to prison. I had to, that was okay. But they would be in front of me. And again, everybody finds religion at time of sentencing, and I'm not being naive here. But they look at me, and several times I would hear the following comments from them. Your Honor, you know, 3 months ago, I recognized that I am a heroin addict, and I have a $200 a day habit. So I went to a treatment facility, and I said, this is what I have, please help me. And they told me, said, you know, go off and fill out some forms, bring them back. So I did. I filled out the forms, brought them back, and they said, I'm sorry, come back in 6 months. We don't have the money. Oh, wait a minute. If this guy is a $200 a day heroin habit, you know how much he has to burglarize of our property to support that habit? It's about $2,000 a day. Because no fence will give him more than about 10% of the value of our stereos or whatever it is they steal. How stupid of us. We, without batting an eye, without even any conscious thought, will spend $25,000 to $30,000 to keep this guy in prison for a year or beyond. But we don't have the money for drug treatment? That's foolish. Drug treatment does work. I believe, libertarian as I am, that drug treatment should be available on demand. Hold people accountable for their actions. Utilize programs that work. And we have discussed some of them. So if you have any questions, I would be honored to address them. It's getting late. I know that Dr. Martin here is about to pull the plug, but this is the most fun for me because I'd like to take any questions that you might have. Anyone?
Yes. So y'all have had experience with medical marijuana in California for a little over 10 years. Do we have any data on whether or not that's influenced the availability of marijuana for teenagers?
The question is with regard to our program of medical marijuana in California. Prop 215, by the way, passed in 1996, passed by 56% of the vote to install a program of medical marijuana in the state of California. Do we have any information that this has made marijuana more available for children?
Or less available.
Or less available? The answer is no, I don't. But it's such a small area. I will openly acknowledge that people will abuse a system. Okay, I'm sorry to have to be cynical and discuss that with you. But if there's a system out there, there'll be some people that'll take advantage of it. There'll be some purveyors that try to go through the motions, but they're really there for alternative purposes. I understand that. But otherwise, for children or for others, I don't think so because it's so much available anyway. It really just hasn't tickled it one way or the other. Yes, in the back.
You discussed marijuana and heroin. What about methamphetamine, crack cocaine? Do you have ideas on how those would be handled?
Sure. The question is, okay, Gray, get real. She didn't phrase it this way, but that's what she means. You've talked about marijuana. That's kind of an easier one. You've talked about heroin, and that's more straightforward. What about the tough stuff? I mean, they're all tough, but what about crack cocaine? What about methamphetamines? Methamphetamines scare the devil out of me. They're really tough stuff. I'm here to tell you, there's no foolproof system. There's no system that will not have problems. And I recognize that. All right, but I'm going to answer your question directly. If I were king of the United States, King James has a ring to it. It hasn't caught on yet. I'm still trying, but we're in no danger whatsoever. I would adopt the option And thank you. I'm going to answer your question in a minute. I would adopt the option, which is the concept of federalism. That is where we should go. And it seems a little bit ironic in the James Baker Institute that I would have to convince anybody of the concept of federalism. This is one of the bedrock foundation principles for the founding of our country. Namely, if you have a more local government that can address the issue, let the most local government that can do it, do it. Get the federal government out of this area completely, which is, by the way, what we did when we finally repealed alcohol prohibition. We did not say that Texas will now sell alcohol when we repealed alcohol prohibition. All we said is the federal government no longer will control this area. The federal government's authority will be restricted simply to assisting each state in enforcing its chosen laws. And in fact, I was here in Texas at San Marcos, between college and law school. I was in the Peace Corps, and I was in training at San Marcos, Texas here for all summer. And that was a dry county at the time. I think it's changed since then, but it was a dry county. That's terrific. Each state can do what it would do. So if I were king of the United States, I would allow California, Texas, whatever, to do what they would do. If I were king of California, now I'm going to answer your question directly, I would install needle exchange programs, medical heroin maintenance programs, and I would also allow the regulated, strictly regulated distribution of heroin, cocaine, and marijuana out of government package stores. That's what I would do. Is that foolproof? Absolutely not. Nobody can design a system that won't work. But we can get the illegal drug sellers out of the equation by reducing the cost. And adults 21 years of age or older can go, they can buy it, no advertising, age restrictions enforced, quality is taken care of. Quantity means that we can get the illegal drug dealers out of business. And I would not do that with methamphetamines. I would hope that people who are using methamphetamines would come over and use the legal cocaine instead of the illegal and synthetic methamphetamines. And then just sit around and see what happens. But with the concept of federalism, maybe Illinois would come up with something that would work better. I hope they would. And if this worked, fine, we could fine-tune it, we could continue with it, or we could try something different. And if Illinois came up with something that worked better than California, California would look around and say, wait a minute, you know, we thought this might work, we tried it, it didn't work. Look at them in Illinois. Maybe we should do what they're doing. And that's 50 crucibles of democracy, in effect, in action, trying to work out these problems. And eventually we're going to stumble upon things that work. If we took a look at this after 4 or 5 years and would decide, you know, it's working pretty well, but we still have a methamphetamine problem, maybe we should expand my program to that. I don't know. I don't know. But these are things, we couldn't do it worse if we tried, so let's try something better. Let's try something different. Yes?
I'm curious as to why you make the distinction between cocaine and methamphetamine, because we already have legally made methamphetamine that is routinely prescribed.
Yes, we do. She's taking me to task, and she's right. Why am I making the distinction between cocaine and methamphetamine? We certainly have legal methamphetamines in the world. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry makes lots of them. Remember fen, you know, that diet pill and stuff? It was basically methamphetamines. So they're available. Yes, and I would still allow medical doctors to practice their profession. And if they're going to prescribe fen or methamphetamines, which they do with regularity, that's fine. That's fine. I would allow medical doctors to practice their trade. However, for non-medical usages, I wouldn't make those available, like I just said. And again, there's nothing that I learned in law school to give me insights onto this. This is what I would try, again, with the concept of federalism. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, my question is, we already know the gradual fatal effect of cigarette, of alcohol. Why are we going to add up another one to this gradual fatal effect and moral decline of the society by promoting marijuana to be legalized?
Okay. Basically, if I understand your question, you're saying, you know, we already have problems with alcohol. We already have problems with cigarettes. Why do we want to add to those by making marijuana, in effect, available under a program like this? Is that what you're saying? Yes. You know, what I would respond to you is that we already have these program problems with marijuana and methamphetamines and the other illegal drugs too. We would probably, if we were to put in this program All right, Gray, you're king for a year in California, and we'll put in the regulated distribution of heroin, cocaine, and marijuana. My opinion is that that would result in an increased usage of heroin, cocaine, and marijuana in the state of California for maybe 6 months, maybe even 12. But after that, people would start realizing what they're doing. Some people would like it, some people wouldn't. You take the glamour out of it, you take the profit motive out of it, and probably you would start seeing a reduction. I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but Holland, with their harm reduction programs, actually, you or I, anybody over 16 years of age, can go in Holland to a coffee shop and buy coffee and tea and sandwiches and marijuana and hashish. Okay? And the Minister of Health of Holland held a press conference as well, this one I do cite in my book, saying, you know something, we only have half the marijuana usage in our country per capita as you do in the United States of America, both for adults and for teenagers. Listen to that. It's available. You can go to a coffee shop, it's basically zoned, you know. They put them in different areas, but they're available. They only have half the marijuana usage per capita in Holland as we do in our country, both for adults and for teenagers. And then he went on to explain why. And you know what he said? We have succeeded in making pot boring. And there's a message there. We glamorize it. We have somebody else with a profit motive to get you using it. In fact, to get you using stronger marijuana. Why? Because this cardinal rule of prohibition is always push the stronger stuff. Always push the stronger stuff. If I'm a bootlegger in alcohol prohibition, what am I going to sell? I run the same criminal justice risks for pushing a barrel of bourbon as I do a barrel of beer, right? Which am I going to push more? The bourbon. Why? Because I make more money at it. You always push the stronger stuff. In my program, we'd start doing away with that. We would reduce, the quality would have to be good, but we would reduce that incentive to push the stronger stuff. So all of these things, we glamorize this in our country. We have people joining gangs to use it. We have people with a profit motive. I mean, Horatio Alger still lives in the United States of America. Basically, they are drug dealers.
That's what I'm trying to point out. What I've heard from you is the government would like to make to be part of making money by legalizing it, and therefore, why give away the money to all the dealers? Why not legalize it and then put tax on it, and then the government gonna make money out of it? And is the government really thinking of the American generation coming next? And for me to legalize it is just killing the next generation. And because, and you have said it, that the alcohol, the cigarette, they are glamorized, you know, how it is advertised, and the children are thinking, hey, for me to have a good time, I need to have a cigarette and an alcohol for me to have a good time. And it's so hard. But why are we bowing to this thing just because the government would like to make money out of it, at the expense of the next society, at the expense of the next generation?
You have asked a question that I have no answer for. Now you've asked 14 questions there, but the question.
But the fact is,
the question
is just because the treatment is not working, we'll just go ahead and bow down and give in.
Okay.
At the expense of the next generation.
I understand, and you are inferring that what I am suggesting would result in greater drug usage among our people, and I don't buy that. But you don't care about what Jim Gray thinks. What I think. I mean, there's nothing in my background, nothing in my training to have you care my opinion. But every neutral study in the United States, Canada, and England for the last 100 years that has looked into this issue, both government commissions as well as corporate foundations, have all reached the same conclusion. They say we should go away from the criminal justice system and usually to what they describe as decriminalization, even if it would result in greater drug usage because of all of the other incredible benefits that we would gain. So I'm not giving up. I'm not giving the last generation up What I am saying is I'm going to save more of the next generation because we're going to take away these harms. People are not going to be shot as often. People are not going to be, if they're using drugs anyway, at least they're not going to be using adulterated drugs of unknown strength and unknown purity. And we're not going to be inflicting these enormous harms all around the world.
But you know what? Everything is like, if that would be legalized, the marijuana, you know what? That there will be another next step. Hey, let's make methamphetamine legalized.
I understand that's a fear. I do understand that that is a fear. What I am saying is, let's take it one step at a time, sit back and see what happens. And first of all, again, I wouldn't legalize anything. There is the strictly regulated control, not allowing any form of advertising, not allowing any form of illegal pushing. Yes?
Now, these drugs were at least marijuana and cocaine and some of the others were available legally
Yes.
in the United States prior to the turn of
Before 1913.
1913, was that the date?
Yes. You know, with the passage of the Harrison Narcotics Act in 1913, prior to that time, there were no drugs that were illegal nationwide. And we really didn't have much of a drug problem back in that period of time. And you can look at the desk blotters, you know, the marshals, the police and everything, when they'd arrest people, when they do all of this stuff, there really weren't that many drug problems, except for two areas. Now I know we're getting late, but it's really interesting to see that before the passage of the Harrison Narcotics Act back in 1913, we had two groups of people in our country that were addicted generally to narcotics. You will maybe guess one of them, you'll never guess the second. The first group was the people, the men who had been involved in the Civil War from the North, and they'd gotten amputated legs or big-time injuries, and they were given morphine rather consistently, and they developed an addiction to morphine such that they actually called it the soldier's disease. And these people, of course, were still alive at that period of time, and they were addicted. You know the second group of people that were addicted to drugs before the passage of that act? You'll never guess. Mid-level, Midwestern American housewives. Why? Because of all of these tonics, because of all of these, you know, Uncle Ben's snake oils and the rest of that. You know, they would advertise on their labels, this will make you feel a whole lot better. And it was half cocaine. And so we finally passed the most effective drug law in the history of the United States of America, 1904 Federal Truth in Drug Packaging Act. And that required the snake oil people to actually put on the label what was in their product. And when people saw this stuff contained cocaine, they were aghast and they stopped using it, and that put the snake tonics out of business forever. So we're selling ourselves short by saying, you know, if we were to make these drugs available, that means everybody would go out and use them. And that's stupid. That's insulting, actually, to that degree. Yes?
Yeah, I see some wisdom in the things you're talking about.
Careful, you get into lots of trouble with that.
No. I'm going to take care of that in a minute.
I believe.
But I think that the frustration comes around the issue of moving ahead in what makes sense in criminal policy, but not keeping up in our public health policy, which is exactly what we did with coming out of Prohibition with alcohol. Certainly we made alcohol available, but we did not move ahead in dealing with the disease of alcohol problems.
You're right.
And again, we're seeing some of those same things.
Right.
Let's make it legal, but not answer the disease issue.
And you're absolutely right. You know, we still have problems with alcohol in our country, and of course we do. But at least we don't have Al Capone. You know, we are taking these medical issues and we're bringing them to the medical community. Will we have no problems anymore? Again, you can't design a system that won't have problems. I acknowledge that. What we're trying to do is recognize this is a tough area and reduce the problems. So I say, just like with the Donovan State Prison matter that I used, drug treatment should be available on demand. I mean, it's in all of our best interests to have that occur. I can't resolve all of the problems in the world today. I can't resolve the healthcare issue right now. I agree that it certainly needs some attention, and I'm not abandoning anything. I'm just changing course.
Those of us in treatment would like to see drug treatment available on need.
I agree.
Because unfortunately, you needed a long time before you start demanding it.
I have tried to make that fact clear. Drug treatment does work. Rand Corporation on forward. I know time is fleeting, and I'm going to leave you with a story. And then I will be the last one out of the auditorium. So if you have further questions that I can address, I'm happy to do it, because you're getting involved in this and you're discussing it, which is all I really want to have happen. Let's put our minds together. We couldn't fail but come up with a better policy than the one we have today, because what we're doing now isn't working. So I heard a story.
Can I say something?
Just a minute. At this point, talk to me afterwards. Talk to me afterwards, please, because now you're intruding on my final story, and I love it. There was this man on his deathbed. There was this man on his deathbed who, at the very end of his life, called his wife to his side and said, "Dear, I know I'm not long for this earth, but before I leave you, I just want to get something off my chest. And I think you had a right to hear this and hear it from me. That for a number of years now, I've been having an affair with such and such a woman that lives across the street. And again, I'm sorry to hurt your feelings, but I think you had the right to hear this." She looked at him. She thought for a moment, and then she said, "That's okay. I know. That's why I poisoned you." Well, in such a similar way, we are poisoning ourselves by our choice of policies in this matter. We couldn't do it worse if we tried. We need to give people that know, people in elective office, we need to give them political cover. We need to discuss these issues openly and fully. I don't have all the answers. I probably proved that tonight. But I can tell you that we've got to do something, because we are really inflicting enormous pain, suffering, hardship, crime, death upon our own people and those around the world. So that's why I'm here. Bill, again, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity of discussing it with you. Good luck to you.